Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. Today, how far can a human's thirst for revenge push the boundaries of an interstellar con? Let's get into the story. Rockthar slithered across the crowded bazaar, antennae twitching, his four eyes scanning for opportunities. The scent of exotic spices and stale coolant mingled in the recycled air, a typical trading hub on the edge of the Terran expansion zone. Rockthar excelled in places like these. As an Inpare, a race of shrewd negotiators and natural swindlers, the chaos was his natural element. Then he saw him, a human, standing at a cluttered stall clad in worn overalls and scuffed boots. Donald, the name tag read. The human had a mop of unruly brown hair and an air of distracted naivete. Rockthar's mandibles clicked instinctively. This was the mark, an easy and unsuspecting target ready to be fleeced. "Greetings, friend." Rockthar sidled up to the stall, extending a three-fingered hand in practiced welcome. "You have the look of a traveler interested in the unique." Donald blinked and then offered a hesitant smile. "Well, I am a bit new at all this," he admitted, his voice thick with a Terran accent. "Just got a transport ship and trying to figure out what sells out here." Rockthar practically tasted the opportunity. Indeed, there are fortunes to be made, and alas, fortunes to be lost. He gestured towards his wares, a mix of trinkets and half-functional tech salvage. "Perhaps, with my expert eye, we could find something ideal to launch your trading career." He selected a chip data crystal, a common in-parrot trick. The crystals were practically worthless, but with the right sob story about data corruption and endangered family fortunes, he could turn a hefty profit. Donald hefted the crystal, peering at it. "This looks, interesting." "Perfect." Rockthar warmed to his tail, spinning a yarn about a desperate aristocrat fleeing persecution. "Tragic, really?" he clucked. "A single corrupted sector, the entire lineage at stake. Imagine, their entire fortune tied to this one." He trailed off, letting greed fill the silence. Donald hummed in consideration. "How much?" Rockthar named his usual exorbitant sum, anticipating the satisfying haggle that would inevitably bring the gullible human down to an inflated but immensely profitable price. But instead of haggling, Donald simply shrugged. "I'll take it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a credit chit with a value that nearly made Rockthar's hearts flutter. There was a snag in the plan, a glitch too smooth to be simple naivety. A shiver ran down Rockthar's carapace, antennae twitching in unease. "Perhaps," he said slowly, trying to gain time, "perhaps I should check the data for any remaining errors. Professional courtesy, of course." Donald merely smiled. "Please, do." As Rockthar slotted the crystal, a flicker of recognition stirred in his mind. This wasn't a desperate aristocrat's data. These were military encryptions. Old, low-level, but recognizable to any soldier who had served near the expansion zone, which meant the scruffy human wasn't a naive traitor. He was bait, and Rockthar had just bitten. His mandibles clicked together in alarm. Rockthar needed to act fast, but the second he tried to remove the crystal, Donald's hand shot out, gripping his wrist in an iron vice. Though the human looked slight, the strength was uncanny. "You know," Donald remarked, his voice now flat and devoid of his earlier accent, "there's a funny thing about old military encryptions. Takes a real specific kind of person to recognize them." Rockthar's hearts pounded. He was caught, but escape wasn't entirely out of the question. Lucky guess, perhaps?" He attempted a nervous chuckle, but it cracked in his throat. "More like I knew what I was putting on that crystal," Donald replied. His grip tightened and a flicker of cold steel flashed in his other hand. A stun knife, basic but highly effective. Desperation clawed at Rockthar. "Let's talk about this," he pleaded. "There's a misunderstanding." "Don't insult me," Donald cut him off. "I just spent 3 miserable months in an in-parrot labor camp, thanks to a misunderstanding." His voice was laced with ice. A darkness Rockthar had never witnessed in a human before. The bazaar blurred around him. A labor camp? The stories were always grim, brutal places where non-Terrans were worked, broken, This human had endured that and come out hardened. This was payback, Rockthar realized aloud, pieces falling sickeningly into place. The careless traitor act, the overly generous offer, this was a trap. Donald simply nodded. Turns out humans make pretty damn good bait when they're angry enough. He gave a sharp tug, pulling Rockthar off balance as the stun knife hovered menacingly close to a vital joint. Now, you and I are going to have a little chat about your friends from the camp. Rockthar sputtered in protest, but his captor was already moving, guiding him through the maze of stalls with a purpose that terrified Rockthar more than any overt threat. The Impare were clever, manipulative, but their physiology didn't suit direct confrontation. Humans, Rockthar discovered with a chill, were adaptable. They slipped into a winding alleyway away from prying eyes. The air grew heavy with the scent of old machine oil and something distinctly less savory. Rockthar had been down enough similar alleys to know what kind of deals transpired in the shadows. It was rarely a place you exited unscathed. The human stopped in front of a grimy door, its ident reader busted long ago. He leveled his gaze at Rockthar. "Remember, friend," Donald's smile held not a hint of humor, "you do not want to be on the wrong side of a human." Donald kicked the door open, revealing a dimly lit room littered with broken synthale bottles and stained furniture. 3 figures bolted upright from a greasy couch, their surprise cut short by recognition. In-parrot, all of them, with the telltale paunch and shifty eyes of low-level smugglers and enforcers. Perfect examples of the scum Rockthar usually called associates. "Rockthar, old friend?" The largest in-parrot slurred, a half-full bottle in his hand. "Fancy seeing you, out of the blue." "I have a business proposition," Donald said, shoving Rockthar unceremoniously onto the threadbare couch. The in-parrot trio eyed him warily, instincts registering the shift in power dynamics. "And who might you be?" The biggest one barked out a laugh, attempting to project authority. "Let's just say I'm a friend of a friend." Donald leaned against the wall, arms crossed casually, the stun knife now tucked out of sight. "And well, that friend had a rather unpleasant stay at your establishment." Rockthar saw it then. The glint in the in-parrot's eyes shift from confusion to dawning horror. It seemed the rumors from the camp weren't exaggerations. This unassuming human wasn't here to bargain, but to judge. And Terrans, Rockthar had swiftly learned, were terrifyingly thorough when it came to retribution. "Now," Donald continued, that cold smile back on his face, "my friend claims your hospitality is lacking. Mind explaining those missing credit transfers from his account?" The biggest in-parrot sputtered, denial ready on his tongue. Donald casually picked up a dented metal pipe from a nearby crate, hefting it experimentally. "Perhaps," he mused, "a practical demonstration of your disciplinary methods would refresh your memory." The pipe twirled in his fingers, the silent threat more potent than any shouted insult. The in-parrot deflated, greed warring with rising fear. After a few agonizing minutes, they spilled apologies and excuses, stumbling over each other to place the blame elsewhere. Donald listened, impassive, occasionally tossing the pipe hand to hand. It became chillingly obvious that they barely remembered their guest among the countless prisoners they'd abused for profit. For them, it was routine cruelty. For Donald, it was a spark capable of burning down everything they held dear. When they ran out of words, Donald nodded at Rockthar. "You," he addressed the petrified in-parrot. "Remember every credit they stole, and you'll make it right. Or else." He trailed off, letting the image of the pipe complete the sentence. The weight of Donald's judgment fell heaviest on Rockthar. Unlike his companions, he recognized the situation for what it was. A death sentence served with chilling efficiency. To humans, theft was a crime. To those who'd survived the camps, it was a theft of life, the precious hours that turned into days and months of torment. He knew this wouldn't end with a simple repayment. The pipe spun once more in Donald's hand before he tossed it aside with a clatter. "You lot," he said, his voice cutting through the in-parrot's whimpers, "are going to do some good in this galaxy, whether you like it or not." He turned to Rockthar, the stun knife appearing in his hand again. "You're coming with me." The declaration was less a request and more a command. Fear prickled Rockthar's scales. Was this it? Would the human eliminate the witness? But as Donald motioned with the stun knife for him to follow, an impossible idea began to flicker in his mind. Perhaps this wasn't about revenge, it was about something far more terrifying. They left the goons to their panic and headed back into the bustling bazaar. On any other day, Rockthar would have been scheming, scamming, thriving in the chaos, yet every step he took was filled with foreboding. Humans were known for their pragmatism, and Rockthar couldn't shake the feeling he was about to become a tool in a much larger game. Donald stopped in front of a less flashy stall, filled with spare mechanical parts and old datapads. He produced the corrupted crystal and addressed the startled vendor, voice pitched for those nearby to hear. "Friend, do you think you can fix this? Some vital data? Desperate aristocrat situation. You understand?" Rockthar's antenna shot up. It was his con, word for word, only this time not aimed at the human but at the other denizens of the bazaar. The vendor squinted at the crystal, greed battling confusion on his face. Donald flashed a generous credit chit. The vendor's objections crumbled as he scrambled to promise the impossible. "This is only the beginning," Donald murmured to Rockthar, the slightest hint of satisfaction on his face. He then led them across the bazaar, stopping at stall after stall, repeating the same charade. With each successful con, Rockthar felt not relief, but a deepening sense of unease. Donald was playing them all. Not just playing them, weaponizing their greed. The human wasn't just getting revenge, he was building something. Each swindle, each inflated sale, was a stone dropped into the murky waters of the bazaar, the ripples of chaos spreading further with each iteration. News traveled fast in this underbelly of trade. Whispers started, stories about a lost fortune and a desperate aristocrat, followed by tales of easy wealth found in worthless salvage. It was brilliant, utterly ruthless. It was, Rockthar realized, scarily effective. The in-parrot within him instinctively recoiled. Every con, every lie violated some unwritten rule of their kind. It was too loud, too blatant, and would inevitably draw attention they did not want. But the human didn't care. Rules could be bent, systems broken as long as they served his purpose. By the time the last of the setting suns dipped below the horizon, a network of deceit stretched across the bazaar. Rockthar watched wide-eyed as the human's web ensnared not just petty crooks, but bigger players, those who normally operated with a veneer of legitimacy. They were lured out, hungry for a piece of the rumored fortune, ready to prey on the invented desperation of a vanished noble. And presiding over this orchestrated pandemonium stood the human, a puppet master pulling unseen strings. "We wait," Donald said simply, as they found a shadowed corner to observe the fruits of their day's labor. "Wait for what?" Rockthar wanted to scream. For the authorities to storm in? For rival syndicates to start a war over the non-existent wealth? He had never truly understood the human concept of a plan within a plan, until this horrifying moment. Donald merely smiled. "You thought the worst of the camp was the beatings, didn't you?" he asked softly, gaze fixed on the chaos of the bazaar. It wasn't. It was the waste, the days, the lives, wasted for profit, for amusement. That's what they have to pay for. Not just one man, but the whole damn rotten system. Rockthar shuddered. The human's anger was vast, a cold, relentless force. He wasn't dismantling a labor camp. He wasn't just setting fire to the swindler rulebook. He was setting a fire on the whole damn system. And Rockthar, with his knowledge and his cunning, was the kindling. The embers of the fire started spreading, gaining momentum and gaining heat. Whispers evolved into rumors, rumors into frantic hunts for the mythical crystal. The bazaar, already a den of thieves and opportunists, erupted into open avarice. Rockthar, under Donald's watchful eye, became the face of this deception, cornered again and again by greedy traders, desperate enforcers, and shadowy figures whose dealings were best kept unseen. He perfected the wide-eyed innocence, the frantic pleas for help, and each time Donald supplied him with another sliver of encrypted data, useless scraps that kept the hungry sharks circling. They ripped information from him, promising riches or retribution in equal measure. Rockthar quickly realized what his true role in this mad chess game was: a distraction, a target designed to draw attention. Meanwhile, Donald vanished into the underbelly of the trading hub. He wasn't idle. Each night, Rockthar would see him slip into seedy cantinas or abandoned warehouses, returning before dawn with his clothes rumpled and a dangerous glint in his eyes. Occasionally, he'd hand Rockthar cryptic messages coded in a cipher even the shrewd Inparit couldn't crack. It was enough to make him realize the scope of the humans' plan went far beyond simple revenge. The chaos escalated just as Donald had predicted. Fights broke out over forged leads, traps were set for competitors vying for the non-existent aristocratic fortune. The delicate balance of power in the bazaar tipped, territories shifted, and long-held truces shattered. It was a beautiful, brutal display of human strategy. But what, Rockthar wondered fearfully, was the end game? This couldn't burn forever. On the fifth night, the answer came raining down in a storm of laser fire. A sleek, heavily armed transport vessel descended not at the official docking bays, but amidst the squalor of the bazaar. Heavily armored figures, their insignia unknown, spilled onto the streets, ruthlessly clearing a path. Donald materialized beside Rockthar, a flicker of grim satisfaction on his face. "You see, friend," he remarked, "when everyone's a crook, no one trusts their neighbors. In a power vacuum, well, some people are very interested in filling those." The mysterious enforcers weren't there to quell the chaos, but to exploit it. They moved with military precision, seizing territories, confronting those who now profited from the disorder Donald had sown. The bazaar descended into a war zone, but this wasn't a mindless brawl. Amidst the blaster fire, there was a chilling order, a clear agenda executed with brutal efficiency. It was then Rockthar understood. The labor camp hadn't just angered a single man. It had been a testing ground. Donald had learned how greed corrupted, how to shatter systems from within, and now he and his unseen allies were moving in to claim the prize, whatever that prize ultimately was. As the fighting reached a fever pitch, a single figure emerged from the sleek transport vessel. It was a woman, tall and imposing, with an air of command that sliced through the chaos. Even without the formal military dress, she radiated power of a far more dangerous kind. Donald angled himself in front of Rockthar, shielding his trembling form. "This gets a bit tricky now," he whispered, a hint of tension beneath his cool facade. The woman marched directly towards them, flanked by armed bodyguards. Her gaze settled on the human, and a flicker of recognition crossed her chiseled features. "Well, well," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic for one so imposing. "The ghost of Outpost 57 rises again." The name sent a chill down Rockthar's spine. Outpost 57. That was where the rumors of the brutal Inparit camps originated. Had Donald been more than a simple prisoner there? "Surprised to see me alive, Commander?" Donald countered, returning her scrutiny with unwavering steadiness. "Always, Lieutenant," she replied, the corner of her lip tilting upwards in a predatory smile. "Though Lieutenant seems a bit outdated, doesn't it?" With sickening clarity, it all clicked for Rockthar. The military encryption, the disciplined brutality, the grand-scale manipulation. Donald wasn't ex-military. He was something far more dangerous, an intelligence operative, perhaps even the fabled ghost of Outpost 57, a figure whispered about in hushed tones, a symbol of both hope and terror along the Terran expansion zone. "My mistake," Donald conceded. "I'm a simple trader these days." His smile was edged with irony, but his eyes held flint. "But simple traders are easily provoked, as you've learned." The woman laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Provoked? Boy, you practically gift-wrapped us this entire operation." She gestured towards the war-torn bazaar. "But then anger makes for sloppy strategy, doesn't it?" Her gaze shifted back to Donald, calculating. "We'll overlook the mess. It was effective." "And the camps?" Donald challenged, his voice tight. "The camps?" She shrugged dismissively. "A regrettable necessity. Cleaned up long ago. Loose ends dealt with. Business as usual." Rockthar felt a surge of disgust. To them, the suffering of thousands was just collateral damage, a minor inconvenience. The human's hands clenched into fists, but he held his ground. "Not your usual," the woman amended. "You have potential. Wasted in those camps. Wouldn't you agree?" It was an offer, laced with both threat and opportunity. Donald was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Assuming my friend here walks away free," he countered, gesturing towards a thoroughly terrified Rockthar. The woman regarded the in-parrot with disdain before turning back to Donald. "We have our own uses for a seasoned swindler. Perhaps we can," she offered a chilling smile, "repurpose his talents." Donald met her gaze, and in that moment, Rockthar saw the ghost of the prison camp fade, replaced by something far colder and more calculating. Whatever deal the humans struck, it would come with a terrible price. And Rockthar? He was a tool, used and discarded at their whim. He survived the humans' wrath only to walk into a far more insidious trap. The wrong side of a human was treacherous indeed. Rockthar had traded one cell for another. The confines of his quarters aboard the sleek military vessel were clean, efficient, and filled with monitoring tech that made a prisoner yearn for simple bars and chains. Here, his every word, every breath was likely analyzed by unseen watchers. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. When nightmares of the camp didn't plague him, it was the memory of Donald's face that twisted his gut. The cold pragmatism, the way he'd bartered Rockthar's life, and likely his soul, as if negotiating the price of used tech. Humans were terrifying in their anger, but this newfound respect, it was infinitely more chilling. His training commenced with jarring brutality, no beatings but a systematic dismantling of every trick, every lie he'd perfected as an in-parrot. They honed his deception, not to swindle credits but to infiltrate networks, to gather information as vital and dangerous as the military codes he'd once baited Donald with. He learned to mask his tells, to project emotions at will, his very being forged into a weapon. It was a cruel irony. His employers didn't value him as a person, but as a tool, one honed with their knowledge yet intrinsically in parrot. A crooked knife amidst their well-oiled machine. Sometimes late at night, he wondered if this was what Donald had seen in him that first day, the potential to sow chaos in a way no stoic human ever could. And so, Rockthar, seasoned swindler, became a phantom. A face whispered in back alleys, a name linked to shadowy figures and the swift downfall of illicit enterprises. He played his part, his revulsion growing with each con, each life inadvertently ruined through his actions. It was worse than the camps, in a way, this constant gnawing feeling that he perpetuated the very system he now despised. Would he find a way out of this gilded cage, or was he forever destined to be a pawn, moved across the galaxy on a board he couldn't comprehend, serving masters far more monstrous than any camp guard? Months passed in a blur of carefully constructed lies and heart-stopping missions. Rockthar was dropped into the seediest corners of the expansion zone, forced to play roles he'd never imagined. He was an arms dealer one day, a desperate whistleblower the next, each identity meticulously crafted by his handlers. The work was a twisted reflection of his past life. Instead of swindling for personal gain, he now manipulated those in power to serve the shadowy purposes of his captors. Targets weren't chosen on profitability, but for the potential damage their downfall could cause. He became the unseen hand-tipping scales, toppling corrupt officials or dismantling smuggling rings. Actions the humans could never take directly without causing an uproar. He excelled out of grim necessity. Every success brought begrudging praise from the commander, that same chilling smile on her face as when they'd first struck their bargain. Yet, with each job, Rockthar learned a bit more about this organization hidden within the Terran forces. They weren't just cleaning up messes, but actively shaping them, fueling conflicts and undermining alliances on a scale that dwarfed his old schemes. One night, he was tasked with seducing information from a mining magnate suspected of illegally arming a separatist group. The target was easy, a greedy, lecherous man easily distracted by Rockthar's newly trained wiles. But as secrets spilled alongside expensive wine, Rockthar unearthed an unsettling truth. The separatists were mere pawns, a distraction to mask a far more insidious plan. The information sent ice through his veins. The commander and her allies weren't upholding any sort of order. They were the architects of the chaos. The realization hit harder than any beating in the camps. They needed the galaxy a fractured, volatile place, their goals thriving in the shadows of conflict. And Rockthar was their perfect saboteur, a creature of that same underworld now refined under their brutal tutelage. The question burned inside him. Was survival at this cost worth it? He could continue on their path, ensuring his own safety at the expense of countless others. But the image of Donald's face, the fury over a few stolen credits, mocked him. Humans didn't tolerate injustice, even on a grand scale. Sleepless nights were spent plotting. Every face, every contact made became a potential lifeline. Separatists, disgruntled businessmen, even old in-parrot rivals, he'd deceived anyone who might be disillusioned by the commander's manipulations. It was a long shot, a plan riddled with danger, but the alternative was a lifetime of being the unseen monster in the machine. Rockthar had to once again play the biggest con of his life, but this time, instead of swindling marks for riches, he was gambling with his soul, and the stakes had never been higher. Rockthar's escape wasn't a break for freedom, but a calculated fall into another treacherous game. His network of disgruntled contacts, built with whispered half-truths and promises of exposing a greater evil, offered a meager haven. He was a liability, a walking secret, but they were desperate enough to harbor him, at least for a time. His days were a strange echo of his past and present. He was once again scheming, bargaining, trading favors, but the currency had changed. No longer were glittering credits the goal, but coded messages, hidden supply drops, and alliances forged on fragile trust with those he'd once exploited. Each tentative deal fueled the flickering hope that perhaps he could orchestrate something, however small, against the vast military machine he had served. The humans hadn't underestimated him. They knew their tool could turn against them the moment they looked away. Thus began the hunter and the hunted within the shadowy networks of the expansion zone. Rockthar was forever glancing over his shoulder, sleep a fitful thing snatched between changes in location and identities. His once carefully honed disguises now served to keep him hidden, not to draw in easy marks. He exploited the very hunger for vengeance his missions had stoked in others. Every collapsed business, every exposed corrupt official fueled the underworld's suspicion. He was the ghost, the whisper of a devastating betrayal, hunted by the commander's forces yet reluctantly protected by those eager to capitalize on the chaos. It was a tightrope walk without a safety net. Any wrong move, any misplaced trust, could mean a swift, brutal end at the hands of the humans or those who now resented his very existence. Each time he outsmarted a hunter, sent his way, or struck a blow against the organization through his allies, he felt both a grim triumph and a deepening dread. They would find him eventually. Perhaps they were merely toying with him, allowing this illusion of control. One weary evening, huddled in the cargo hold of an old smuggler ship amidst pungent fuel fumes, a flicker of information reached him. There was a gathering, separatists, disgruntled warlords, shadowy figures whose empires had crumbled under the commander's machinations. It wasn't organized resistance, yet, but the seeds were there. Continue his lone crusade, a series of stinging attacks and desperate escapes, or risk it all on a gamble more audacious than any con he'd ever attempted. He could walk into that meeting, a face remembered for all the wrong reasons, and attempt to unite a fractured underworld against a common enemy. It was madness. Yet the whispers said Donald would be there, the legendary ghost of Outpost 57, likely hunted in the same way Rockthar now was. This wasn't just about survival anymore, but about finding a strange kind of redemption. Rockthar, the opportunist, the swindler, might be the unlikely catalyst to ignite a true rebellion, the most dangerous and exhilarating scheme of his life. The gathering place was a derelict space station, a relic from a forgotten conflict, orbiting a dead moon at the furthest edge of charted space. It buzzed with a desperate energy Rockthar knew well, the mingling of ambition, fear, and a sliver of shared purpose. His arrival was met with hisses and drawn weapons, his reputation preceding him. The in-parrot rat comes to bargain? A reptilian being, scarred and sporting cybernetic enhancements, spat at his feet. If you wish to continue squabbling over the scraps they leave you, Rockthar retorted, his voice pitched to Carrie. Be my guest. I bring a different opportunity. The room shifted, curiosity warring with distrust. He felt their gazes, assessing, looking for weakness or the familiar glint of a double cross. Rockthar held his ground, the long months on the run hardening his resolve. He offered no pleas for forgiveness, no promises of easy victories. Instead, he painted a stark picture of the commander's manipulations. He divulged secrets, sacrifices made on their grand chessboard, not out of guilt, but from the cold strategy he had learned so brutally well from his captors. The information landed like burning coals in the room. Whispers turned into heated debates. Old rivalries flared, then dimmed as the chilling realization sank in. They were all peons, their triumphs mere distractions. Then, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a human, with the bearing of a soldier, battered, but not broken. It was Donald. Rockthar wasn't sure if he faced a savior or his executioner. Their eyes met, a long, silent exchange passing between them. "You've caused one hell of a mess, friend," Donald said, a flicker of grim humor in his voice. "Time to see if you can clean it up." It wasn't absolution, but it was the closest thing to trust Rockthar expected to get. His plan hung on a knife's edge. Could he, a swindler and an outcast, truly rally this assembly of hardened warlords and vengeful outlaws? He laid out his scheme, not a glorious charge, but a series of calculated strikes. Disrupt supply lines, expose alliances the commander worked so hard to forge, paint them not as liberators, but as the new oppressors. Turn the underworld's anger outwards, fueling 1,000 small thorns in the side of the vast, impersonal machine. The goal wasn't immediate victory, but to create an unsustainable chaos, to buy enough time for a true rebellion to take root. "You think they'll follow a traitor and a ghost?" one of the leaders scoffed. "They'll follow success," Rockthar countered, his gaze meeting Donald's. "They'll listen to results." It was a long shot, fraught with danger at every turn, yet in this room of predators and survivors, Rockthar saw a flicker of something he recognized all too well: desperate hope. Hope ignited not by lofty ideals, but the cold, pragmatic fury of the betrayed. And so it began. Not a righteous war, but a shadowy campaign waged in whispers and stolen shipments, fueled by a motley alliance orchestrated by a hunted human and an inparrot used to walking the tightrope between profit and ruin. The wrong side of a human was a dangerous place indeed, but as Rockthar learned, when faced with absolute ruthlessness, sometimes the only way to fight back was to become equally ruthless yourself. Their war wasn't fought on open battlefields, but in shipping manifests, coded transmissions, and whispered rumors spread amidst the grimy cantinas where the disgruntled gathered. Every small victory resonated far beyond its immediate impact. A supply shipment mysteriously vanished, a corrupt official exposed, their carefully crafted alliances crumbling under internal suspicion. The commander and her forces used to orchestrating chaos were now the ones reacting, scrambling to find the source of the disruption. Rockthar reveled in a grim satisfaction as he felt their focus shift, their hunters diverted, and the carefully balanced underworld thrown into disarray. He became a master of disguise and deception. No longer were the flamboyant personas of a swindler needed, but the ability to fade into the background, to be the quiet, unassuming figure overlooked by those fixated on grand threats. His in-parrot physiology, once a beacon of his nature, now served as an unexpected advantage. Humans and even the most seasoned outlaws often underestimated him, blinded by their own prejudices and the echoes of his past betrayals. Their network grew, not in numbers but in strategic reach. Disillusioned dock workers, comms technicians with questionable morals, and even a few low-level officials, tired of being pawns in a game they barely understood, whispered crucial information that allowed them to strike with calculated precision. Donald, true to the legend of the Outpost 57 ghost, remained elusive. He was the unseen general, his plans conveyed in encrypted drops or through intermediaries, yet his reputation was its own weapon. Whispering his name sowed fear amidst their enemies, while fueling a fierce, desperate loyalty among their meager forces. The commander's response was brutal, as expected. Those suspected of collaboration faced swift and often public retribution. Trust became a dangerous commodity. Their allies were motivated not by loyalty to Rockthar or a belief in a better future, but by a shared need for vengeance or the raw desire to survive the coming storm. One tense night, Rockthar was summoned to a meeting with Donald in the ruins of an abandoned colony, the shattered buildings an eerie backdrop to their clandestine war. The human was gaunt, his eyes haunted by months of constant battle. "Traitor and ghost don't inspire much long-term loyalty," Donald said without preamble. "They'll turn on you, on us, the moment it's convenient. Then we must make it damned inconvenient," Rockthar countered, with a resolve forged in the crucible of constant fear and narrow escapes. Donald offered no easy answers, no promises of future absolution. But for the first time, Rockthar saw him not as the vengeful force he'd first encountered, but as a leader burdened by a war he hadn't chosen yet couldn't abandon. That night, under the shattered moon, they didn't just plan strikes or counterattacks. They outlined possibilities for a future beyond mere survival. Crude plans were drawn for secure supply chains, independent of the corrupt markets, an alternative network to help those fleeing the ever-increasing fallout of their war. It was fragile and far from guaranteed, but it was the first glimmer of something beyond the destructive path they were on. The wrong side of a human had taught Rockthar brutal lessons, had forced him to become a creature he barely recognized. But it might, if they survived long enough, lead him to forge an even more unlikely path: redemption. Their campaign couldn't remain in the shadows forever. As the disruption grew, so did the commander's desperation. Rockthar's allies, emboldened yet increasingly reckless, began to engage in more overt attacks. They were playing a dangerous game, escalating the conflict with every success, the noose slowly tightening. The inevitable turning point came on a remote mining asteroid. Their plan was a textbook example of their usual tactics: incite a workers' revolt, disrupt production to further destabilize the commander's operation. But it went wrong. Catastrophically wrong. What should have been a bloodless uprising turned into a brutal massacre. The miners, promised support that never materialized, were ruthlessly crushed. When news reached Rockthar, encoded in a chilling transmission filled with static and panicked cries, guilt and rage warred within him. Donald was less conflicted. "They've changed tactics," he concluded, his voice grim. "No more playing subtle. This was a message to us, to anyone who dare resist." His words sent a shiver down Rockthar's spine. The commander was turning the underworld's own aggression back on them, showing a willingness for ruthless bloodshed that sent a wave of despair through their fragile coalition. Dissenters began to vanish. Old suspicions resurfaced. The very foundation of their tenuous operation cracked further. "We're losing them," Rockthar admitted, the weight of the dead miners heavy on his conscience. "We need a victory," Donald said, his eyes fixed on some distant horizon. "A real one. Something that'll show we're not just ghosts, and we're not some idealistic rebellion, but a damned reckoning." He laid out a daring, some would say insane plan. Target a high-profile commander's transport, not to destroy it, but to capture it with minimal casualties. Force their enemy out into the open. Rockthar knew the odds were stacked against them. Their network was designed for disruption, not pitched battles. But it was also their last desperate gamble. He summoned their most reliable, or perhaps most foolhardy allies. They weren't an army, just a handful of grizzled fighters, smugglers with questionable loyalties, and technicians skilled in sabotage, not combat. Yet, as they stood under the cold light of twin moons, preparing for the ambush, Rockthar felt something shift. The fear, the doubt. It was still there, but tempered with a fierce resolve. They knew the risks, but faced with the brutality on the asteroid, inaction now felt as damning as any failed scheme. The ambush was brutal, a symphony of blaster fire and desperate gambits. They won, but at a cost. Familiar faces lost in the chaos, their meager force cut down further. Yet, they held the transport, and more importantly, they had prisoners. For the first time, they weren't faceless enemies, but soldiers, technicians, individuals caught in the vast, uncaring machine Rockthar knew all too well. Interrogating them was less about extracting information, more about showing them the cracks in the polished facade the commander projected. The doubts, the fear, mirrored the very emotions they were struggling to overcome themselves. It was a gamble, and morality was a luxury they couldn't afford. But it was one final desperate play to turn the tide of a war that was consuming them all. A war born from the unyielding wrath of a single human. A war that might just offer a twisted, treacherous path towards an impossible redemption. News of the captured transport spread like wildfire through the underworld. It was a victory more symbolic than strategic, but symbolism had been their most potent weapon all along. Rockthar, the infamous double-crosser, found himself the focus of this newfound attention. His past betrayals were whispered alongside grudging acknowledgments of daring strategy and the undeniable results his actions had precipitated. The commander, always a strategist, saw the shift as well. Communications arrived via an anonymous channel, not threats, but an offer. A calculated risk, painted in half-truths and promises of power. They knew their control was slipping, and in Rockthar, they possibly saw a tool to turn the tide once again. "They want to recruit you," Donald stated bluntly, handing Rockthar the decrypted message. "Play on your ambition, your desire for survival." "And you'll let me?" Rockthar countered. There was a flicker of unease beneath his usual bravado. "You'll play along," Donald clarified. "Not as a traitor, but a triple agent. Precarious position, even for you." He smiled wryly. "But you always were better at deception than me." It was madness. Every instinct honed from years on both sides of the law screamed at him to reject the offer, to disappear into the depths of the expansion zone, and pray for a quiet, unremarkable end. Yet when he looked at the haunted faces of their dwindling allies, at the desperation of those who clung to the hope he and Donald embodied, retreat felt like its own kind of betrayal. So began the most dangerous game Rockthar had ever played. He courted his former masters, displaying just enough cunning and ruthlessness to stoke their interest, yet subtly leaving a trail of breadcrumbs back to Donald. Every coded message, every seemingly accidental information leak was a dance on a razor's edge. He was a puppet, but one desperately playing both sides of the stage. The turning point, when it came, wasn't orchestrated by him or Donald, but born of the commander's own hubris. In an effort to break the stalemate, she orchestrated a high-profile strike on a neutral trade hub, a brutal display of power meant to instill fear. The civilian casualties were immense, an act of calculated cruelty that echoed the labor camp on a far more horrifying scale. The underworld wasn't driven by lofty morals, but this crossed a line even the most power-hungry warlords couldn't stomach. Rockthar skillfully channeled the outrage, playing the loyal servant to the commander while fanning the flames of rebellion with practiced whispers. When the commander summoned him, he went not as a pawn, but as a predator. He painted a picture of an underworld poised to ignite, and positioned himself uniquely as the one who could either control the coming explosion or be consumed by it. It was a desperate bluff, but the commander, ever the opportunist, saw the value in his words. She gave him a target, a rival power broker, promising him command and resources to eliminate the thorn in their side. It was both a test and a brutal thinning of the herd. Yet, as Rockthar left her chambers, a twisted plan was already crystallizing in his mind. The wrong side of a human was treacherous, but it had inadvertently made him the perfect weapon against those who sought to control everything and everyone. And perhaps, somewhere along the blood-soaked path, he might even find that impossible thing: absolution. Not for his past, but for the future they might just forge in the crucible of their war. Rockthar's gambit was breathtakingly audacious and fraught with peril at every turn. He took the commander's resources with practiced gratitude, setting the stage for his apparent betrayal of Donald and their motley rebellion. His attack on the rival power broker wasn't about elimination, but a carefully choreographed spectacle. The target was forewarned. The ambush turned into a staged conflict. Blaster fire and calculated destruction, all designed to fuel a convincing illusion, was news of the daring battle, complete with embellished tales of Rockthar's cunning, was strategically leaked, reaching both rebellious ears and the commander's spies. His reputation as a ruthless, power-hungry opportunist soared. The fallout was immediate. The underworld erupted in a flurry of alliances and betrayals. The commander, believing she had gained a powerful lieutenant, found her adversaries suddenly emboldened by the illusion of Rockthar's support. They moved boldly, their plans fueled by misinformation and misdirection carefully planted over months of delicate manipulation. Amidst the chaos, Donald struck. Their dwindling network targeted vulnerable supply lines and exposed secret installations, exploiting the disarray caused by Rockthar's calculated charade. It was a whirlwind of disruption, making it impossible for the commander to ascertain where the true threat lay, in Rockthar's theatrical betrayal or in the lingering specter of the Outpost 57 ghost. Meanwhile, Rockthar became the commander's favored son. He was granted more troops, access to sensitive intelligence, and worst of all, trust. With each success, the noose around his neck tightened, but the opportunities multiplied as well. He fed the commander victories, each one carefully selected to weaken her overall strategic position. while smuggling vital supplies and disappearing key figures amidst the confusion of his own staged triumphs. His deception wasn't flawless. Donald's allies began to question him. Old grudges and suspicions resurfaced. Whispers of triple agents circled as costly sacrifices were made in the name of the grander plan. His was a lonely and brutal role, demanding he betray those who now reluctantly depended on him, eroding the tentative faith they had placed in him. The climax came unexpectedly. An offhand comment from a low-level commander overheard in the drunken stupor of celebration revealed their ultimate target, a remote civilian colony known for its resources and strategic insignificance. The attack wasn't about conquest, but an act of pure devastation designed to crush any remaining resistance. The cold horror he felt mirrored the echoes of the labor camps. The scale was vaster, his complicity less direct, but the result would be the same. Countless innocent lives snuffed out to serve ambitions he once shared. There was no time for deliberation, no opportunity to consult with Donald. Rockthar took the information, buried the burning rage and revulsion, and smiled in gratitude as the commander commended his ruthlessness. Then he vanished. The warning reached the colonists mere hours before the attack. It was a desperate, half-baked plan, hastily whispered into coded channels. Evacuation, sabotage, whatever meager defenses could be mustered against a force meant to overwhelm. When the commander's fleet arrived, they found not a helpless populace, but a world ready for defiance. Rockthar's betrayal, true this time, reverberated through underworld channels, throwing the carefully balanced alliances once again into disarray. The battle was bloody, a testament to the devastation even a small, determined group could inflict. The commander, enraged and blindsided, committed more forces, desperate for a swift, brutal victory to restore dominance. Yet they bled for every inch, facing resistance inspired not by lofty ideals, but the shared fury of those who knew they faced indiscriminate extermination. It was then Donald finally struck. They emerged from the shadows, their meager force striking not at the heart of the battle, but targeting communication arrays, crippling the commander's ability to coordinate her now overextended forces. The colony world held, bruised, but unbroken. The commander was forced to retreat, her aura of invincibility shattered. She had gained a traitor, but in doing so ignited a far more terrifying foe, a cornered and desperate galaxy fighting back not for hope, but for sheer survival. Because if there's one thing Rockthar had learned on the wrong side of a ruthlessly efficient human, it's that sometimes the greatest rebellion is born not from ideals, but from the cold, hard realization that no one's left to fight your battles for you.